What if I told you that the person you've been trying so hard to forget hasn't completely erased you from their mind either? Not in a dramatic or emotional way, not in a way that is supposed to confuse you or pull you back into something unhealthy. Just in a very simple human way that most people experience but rarely talk about out loud. Because when two people share time, conversation, emotion, and experiences, it doesn't just disappear when communication stops. Life doesn't delete people like that. What happens instead is that it gets stored in memory. It becomes part of someone's personal history, whether they acknowledge it or not. But silence changes how we interpret everything. When someone stops calling, stops texting, or stops showing up the way they used to, something subtle begins to happen inside you. The mind doesn't handle unanswered space very well. It doesn't like uncertainty, so it starts trying to complete the picture on its own. You begin to create meaning out of absence. They've moved on. I didn't matter as much as I thought. I've been forgotten. And slowly those thoughts stop feeling like thoughts and start feeling like truth. But most of the time, they are not truth. They are interpretations built from not knowing. Because silence is uncomfortable. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't give clarity. It just leaves space. And the human mind rushes to fill that space with a story, even if the story hurts. But silence is never the full picture. It only shows what is missing on the surface, not what is happening beneath it. There are people who stay silent not because they feel nothing, but because they don't know how to handle what they feel. People who think about reaching out but stop themselves at the last moment. People who reread old messages but never send a new one. People who remember conversations clearly but act distant in real life. People who carry thoughts privately that they never express outwardly. Not everything internal becomes external, and not everything felt becomes spoken. And that is where misunderstanding begins. Because you can only respond to what you can see. But what you cannot see is everything happening in silence. And while all of that is true on their side, something else starts happening on yours without you realizing it. Your attention starts to shift. At first, it feels harmless. You check your phone more than usual, you glance at old messages, you think about what changed, and try to identify the exact moment things became different. You replay conversations in your head, searching for clues that might explain everything. Then it becomes more consistent. You start measuring your emotional state by whether they appeared in your day or not. You start checking silence for meaning. You start waiting without calling it waiting. And slowly your emotional world begins to orbit around something that is no longer actively giving you anything back. That's where the weight begins to form. Not because of what they are doing, but because of what your mind is doing with the absence of clarity. Because attention is powerful. Whatever it stays focused on begins to shape your emotional state. And when your attention stays too long in uncertainty, your peace slowly starts to weaken. You don't always notice it at first. It shows up quietly. You feel more distracted, more emotionally reactive, more mentally occupied than usual. You find yourself overthinking simple things, analyzing tone, timing, silence, distance, and behavior that you cannot control. And at the same time, your real life starts moving into the background without you fully realizing it. Not because life stopped, but because your focus did. That's the part most people miss. They believe they are simply waiting on someone else. But often they are slowly stepping away from themselves while waiting. And that creates a very difficult emotional space. You are not fully present in your current life, but you are not fully detached from the situation either. You are stuck in between, living mentally in something that is no longer actively happening. And that in between space is where emotional exhaustion builds quietly, not from one big moment, but from many small cycles. Thinking, checking, waiting, replaying, hoping, analyzing. And none of it actually produces clarity. It only keeps you emotionally tied to uncertainty. At some point, you have to pause and ask yourself a different question. Not what are they thinking, but what is this doing to me? Because that is the question most people avoid. It is easier to analyze someone else than it is to sit with your own emotional state. It is easier to wonder about their silence than to notice how much of your peace has been affected by it. But your life is not happening in their mind, it is happening in yours. And what is happening inside you matters more than what you are trying to decode outside of you. Because you cannot control what someone else remembers. You cannot control what they feel in silence. You cannot control whether they reach out, stay distant, regret, or move on completely. Those decisions are not placed in your hands. But what is placed in your hands is your attention, your energy, your emotional direction. And that is where everything begins to shift. Because the moment you stop building your emotional world around uncertainty, something starts to change internally. You stop searching for hidden meaning in every gap. You stop replaying conversations trying to find answers that were never spoken. You stop waiting for clarity from something that is not communicating. And slowly, your attention begins to return to your own life. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually. At first, it feels unfamiliar because your mind has been trained to stay alert, to analyze, to monitor, to wait. But over time, that pattern begins to weaken, and something else begins to grow again. Your awareness of yourself, your energy, your direction, your present moment, the parts of your life that were always there but got pushed into the background. You start noticing things again that you stopped paying attention to: your habits, your goals, your environment, the opportunities around you. And what once felt mentally heavy begins to lose its grip on you. Not because everything got resolved, but because you stopped feeding it with constant attention. That is one of the most important turning points in emotional growth. Because healing is not always about answers. Sometimes it is about redirection. It is about stepping out of cycles that keep your mind stuck in loops that never end in clarity, and choosing to come back to your own life again. Because you were never meant to build your peace around someone else's silence. You were never meant to pause your life waiting for understanding that depends on another person's willingness to speak. And you were never meant to lose yourself inside questions that do not move your life forward. Your life is still moving whether they respond or not. Time is still passing. Opportunities are still opening. Your future is still unfolding. But you only start seeing that clearly again when your attention returns to where you are, not where your thoughts have been trapped. So the real shift is not about discovering what someone else thinks. The real shift is deciding what you are going to do with your attention from this moment forward. Because you don't actually need answers to move forward. You need direction. And direction begins when you stop letting uncertainty lead your emotions. When that happens, something quiet starts to change. The thoughts don't disappear, but they stop controlling you. The silence is still there, but it stops defining your emotional state. And your life begins to feel like it belongs to you again. Not to waiting, not to guessing, not to unanswered questions, but to you.